Donald Trump is embroiled in more controversy amid claims that Russia has damaging information about him. Unverified reports say that Russian intelligence agencies have compromising details about his business interests and his private life. Russia dismisses the claims as pulp fiction. The president-elect calls it a political witch hunt. Mr. Trump will give his first media conference since he was elected later today. We'll have the latest from Washington, also this lunchtime. The Prime Minister and the Labour leader clash in the Commons over the state of the NHS. The death of 7-year-old Katie Ruff, a 15-year-old girl, appears in court in York charged with her murder. An emotional farewell. After 8 years in office, Barack Obama prepares to step down and pays tribute to his wife.
For the past 25 years, you have not only been my wife and mother of my children, you have been my best friend.
In the South, concern over the mishandling of an investigation into security at Berkshire's nuclear weapons factory, and the medical mannequins putting trainee midwives through their paces.
Good afternoon and welcome to the BBC News at 1. Russia has dismissed media reports that it's holding compromising information about Donald Trump. It comes after claims in America that Russian intelligence agencies have obtained personally compromising material about his business interests and his private life. Mr. Trump has strenuously denied the allegations, tweeting that the intelligence agencies should never have allowed what he called fake news to leak. In his tweet a few minutes ago, he called it one last shot at him and said, "Are we living in Nazi Germany?" Mr. Trump is due to hold a news conference this afternoon, his first since his election last November. Our correspondent Johnny Diamond reports.
In 9 days' time, he will be president. But never has a president-elect been so ensnared in controversy. The allegations that swirl around him and his aides are unverified. Explosive allegations, all denied by the man himself, of unusual sexual practices and financial impropriety. Leaked to a website. The suggestion that Russian President Vladimir Putin had material which could compromise America's new president. From Mr. Trump, a flat, loud denial.
Many people accept that Donald Trump is the president-elect, but recognize that there are issues, that there are problems, particularly with Russia, that need to be addressed. And so I think that is something that lawmakers are looking, and I think and the intelligence community would like to see Donald Trump take a more proactive approach to addressing.
Moscow's reach into the Trump campaign and the president-elect's success has been a focus of claim and counterclaim for months. The latest allegations were reportedly compiled by a former British intelligence official who was once based in the Russian capital. He is described as a credible source. Donald Trump has an extensive network of links to Russia. This beauty pageant 3 years ago, just one. He has gone out of his way to praise the Russian president. His campaign team stands accused of improper relationships with the Russian government. Gathered by political opponents to discredit Mr. Trump, the report claims that the Russian government obtained material with which to blackmail the new president. With bugged hotel rooms and clandestine meetings, the report reads like a spy thriller. One Trump associate, a lawyer, shot down an allegation almost immediately. Russia scoffed.
Fabrication of such spoof stories is an obvious attempt to damage our bilateral relations.
Washington waits for a new commander-in-chief, a man who promises to overturn the old order, a man confronted by his own spy chiefs with the most lurid of allegations. Never before has the office of a new president been under such scrutiny. Johnny Diamond, BBC News.
Well, our correspondent Paul Wood is in Washington and early morning there in America, but already Mr. Trump has taken to Twitter, clearly furious about these claims.
It's not the first time that he's attacked the CIA. But yes, we haven't seen language like this from him for quite some time. Let's start with what we know. It was definitely originally compiled by a former British intelligence agent, this report, a former MI6 man, and he did it for what's known as an opposition research company here in Washington, D.C. It's a company I know quite well and have visited often. They were working first of all for Jeb Bush's Super PAC, as it's called, in the Republican primaries, and then for an anonymous Democratic Party donor. The allegations themselves are extremely lurid, and out of fairness to Mr. Trump and anybody under the age of 18 watching, I don't think we should relate them. But here's the crucial point. I was able to send a message into the CIA at the beginning of November to ask them about these allegations. It was illegal for any official to talk to me about them, but I got a message back through an intermediary which said the allegations were regarded as credible. And more than that, there was more than a single source for them, not just this MI6 man. There was supposedly more than one tape, not just video but audio, more than one date, and not just in Moscow but in St. Petersburg as well. Now, obviously, if the Russians have blackmail material on Mr. Trump, they're hardly going to release it. So these are necessarily allegations, but they are allegations that are regarded as credible. That's not the same as saying accurate, but they are regarded as credible by the US intelligence community.
Paul Wood in Washington, thank you. The Prime Minister, Theresa May, has called the Red Cross irresponsible and overblown for talking about a humanitarian crisis in the NHS and social care. At Prime Minister's questions, the Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn said the NHS was in crisis, but the Prime Minister was in denial. Our political correspondent Ian Watson reports.
Some medical professionals are issuing critical warnings of the worst ever winter crisis in the NHS. And now Labour want to turn this into a political crisis by piling pressure on the government.
Is there a crisis in the NHS?
He doesn't use the C word. Jeremy Hunt wouldn't talk of a crisis, but he has suggested that patients shouldn't make their way to A&E departments unless their case is urgent. And today, Jeremy Corbyn attacked the Prime Minister, accusing her of trying to wriggle out of the target that most patients should be seen within 4 hours.
But does she agree with him that the best way to solve the crisis of the 4-hour wait is to fiddle the figures so that people are not seen to be waiting so long on trolleys in NHS hospitals?
Over the few weeks around Christmas, we saw the day when more people were treated in accident and emergency within 4 hours than had ever happened before.
Earlier this week, the Prime Minister said she wanted to create a shared society. Well, we've certainly got that. More people sharing hospital corridors on trolleys. More people sharing waiting areas at A&E departments. More people sharing in anxiety created by this government. Our NHS, Mr. Speaker, is in crisis, but the Prime Minister is in denial.
The last thing the NHS needs is a cheque from Labour that bounces. The only way that we can ensure we've got funding for the National Health Service is a strong economy. Yesterday, the Right Honourable Gentleman proved that he's not only incompetent, but that he would destroy our economy, and that would devastate our National Health Service.
This major hospital is really just a heartbeat away from the politicians at Westminster, so the NHS is never really far from their thoughts. The government say they have met the pressures on the NHS by increasing funding and bringing about improvements. The opposition parties don't think that's good enough. But what would they do if they had the power?
Well, the Lib Dems have set up an expert panel to look particularly at the idea of a dedicated health and care tax and set alongside that an independent assessment of how much money the health and care system needs.
In the immediate term, we would argue bringing forward 700 million for social care, which is allocated for 2019. Let's not wait till 2019.
It's £700 million, that's just a down payment, that's not enough.
You're quite correct. We need to look at this and across the board for the long term.
Labour now feel the government's vulnerable on the NHS, but the Conservatives will continue to argue that only they can provide the robust economy that will pay for it. Ian Watson, BBC News, Westminster.
Our assistant political editor, Norman Smith, is in Westminster for us now. How much pressure is the Prime Minister really under over this?
Sophie, I think the the Prime Minister was on the defensive, on the back foot today over the NHS. Yes, she acknowledged there were pressures, but she seemed to put those down to long-term pressures over an ageing population, increasingly complex patient demands, traditional winter illnesses. She rejected out of the hand the idea of any emergency funding. She lambasted the Red Cross for saying there was a humanitarian crisis, and she always seemed to play down some of the terrible trolley waits that have made headlines in recent days, describing them as a small number of incidents where unacceptable practices have taken place. And there is a view at Westminster that Mrs May just doesn't quite get the NHS as a political issue. The intensity of the argument about it, the emotions around it, the vulnerability of the Tory party on this issue, particularly not in the same way as her predecessor David Cameron. And I think there's also a view that she thinks more money, billions more, has been given to the NHS while other departments are being cut, and yet still they can't manage. Why should they get even more? And lastly, there's Brexit. This place has been dominated for months by Brexit, and now the NHS has sort of broken to the surface like a great big iceberg. And I wonder whether it has caught the government off guard. The danger, though, for Mrs May is that however passionate people feel about Brexit, they probably feel as, if not even more passionate about the health service.
Norman Smith, thank you. Well, health experts are warning that without fundamental action, millions of older, ill and disabled people will, in their words, continue to be badly let down. Our health correspondent Robert Pickett reports.
Outside hospitals, queuing ambulances, visual testament, says the Royal College of Physicians, to the crisis facing the NHS. With the new year, some hospitals have faced unprecedented pressure, with 20% more patients than this time last year.
There's just another trauma coming in.
A BBC documentary has gained access to one of England's busiest hospitals, St Mary's in Paddington, as it struggled to meet overwhelming winter demand.
28-year-old male stabbed 3 times.
Accident and emergency departments have borne the brunt of the increasing need for care.
And what about trauma beds?
2. As patients continue to arrive, a shortage of social care has made it hard to discharge those who've recovered.
The minute that we have bed problems, usually due to patients not being able to leave the hospital at the other end, then we end up in this state.
There's currently no cubicles anywhere in A&E to see any new patients.
Patients are having to wait longer in cubicles or corridors for treatment.
It's probably easier for me to say what we've got, which is absolutely nothing at the moment.
It means hard decisions about whom to treat.
This case has trumped the patient with cancer that was going to get done in the other theatre, because she's got a condition which will kill her sometime in the next 3, 4, 5, 6 hours. So if we don't do it now, then there is going to be no 5 hours time for her.
Specialist doctors blame a shortage of qualified staff, saying they're stretched too thinly to meet the challenge they face.
Our members fear that people's lives are at risk because they can't get round to see the patients that aren't yet in the emergency department or indeed are waiting for results to come back. Members and fellows have been writing in, and our council members specifically have said to me that this is the worst they've ever seen.
The Department of Health said it had invested £10 billion to develop health services and relieve pressure on hospitals, and since last year had recruited 3,000 extra nurses and 1,600 more doctors. But will it meet increasing demand? Doctors and experts in social care say the time has come to rethink the long-term future of the NHS. Robert Piggott, BBC News.
Well, with me now is our health editor, Hugh Pym. The NHS is always under huge pressure at this time of the year, but how much more serious is it now?
Well, yes, Sophie, at this time of year there is always particular pressure straight after the holiday season, people going to hospital maybe having held back. What seems to be different this time is the sheer volume. It was busy enough last year, hospitals were really stretched. The volume, the increase, 20% at one hospital, more patients coming through the door, and the figures leaked to the BBC yesterday on the numbers who had to wait unacceptably long periods, 12 hours on a trolley before they could get a bed, revealed a really big increase there as well. So it is under massive pressure, And for the Royal College of Physicians and other leading health and social care leaders to say that this was completely unacceptable, that lives were at risk, as we were hearing there in Robert's piece, shows how seriously the medical profession is taking it. Now, Theresa May and the government acknowledged this, and she did in the House of Commons, but there doesn't seem to be any change of policy. They take the view they've invested more money, they have put more into social care, but how long that is sustainable is anyone's guess. We're in early January in this situation. Winter doesn't suddenly end in the middle of January. There could be 2 more months of pressure. There could be a really cold snap, which adds to the volume of people going into hospital. There could be a nasty outbreak of flu. All these sort of things could come along and push the whole thing even closer to a quite dangerous situation. I think that's the challenge for the government.
Hugh Pym, thank you. And you can see more on the NHS tonight in a special BBC documentary called Hospital. That's on BBC Two at 9 p.m. A 15-year-old girl has appeared in court charged with the murder of a 7-year-old girl in York. Katie Ruff was found critically injured near a playing field in the Woodthorpe area on Monday afternoon. She died later in hospital. Our correspondent Fiona Trott is in York for us now. Fiona.
Sophie, inside Court 1, Katie Ruff's mother and other family members listened carefully as a lawyer spoke on the teenager's behalf. He confirmed her name and address. Because of the severity of the charges, this was a regular magistrates' court sitting here this morning, not a youth court, despite the defendant's young age. She is due to appear before Leeds Crown Court on Friday, charged with murder and possessing an offensive weapon. It's understood that Katie Ruff was found near a playing field behind some houses in the Woodthorpe area on Monday afternoon. Residents there say they saw a woman in the street crying, asking for an ambulance. The 7-year-old was taken to hospital but died from her injuries a short time later. It's hit the community hard. It's affected people who don't know the family. A fundraising page was set up online overnight by a woman who simply said she wanted to help the family through this terrible time. Sophie.
Fiona, thank you. The Forth Road Bridge remains shut in both directions after a lorry crossing this morning was blown over. The driver has been charged with dangerous driving. High winds have caused problems across large parts of northern Britain this morning. More than 2,000 homes across the northeast of England are without power. A main shopping street in Newcastle city centre has also been closed because of damage caused by the weather. Well, Lorna Gordon is at the Forth Road Bridge for us now. Lorna.
Yes, Sophie, the wind over the last half hour here has been gusting to just shy of 50 miles an hour. It is causing problems for the engineers trying to remove that lorry from the centre of the Forth Road Bridge. This is the main artery into Edinburgh from the north, and tens of thousands of cars normally cross it every day. But look at it, for the last 11 hours it has been completely empty of traffic. People having to take a 40-50 mile detour to get into Scotland's capital. Not just problems here though because of the weather, but elsewhere across the country, as Sian Greszczek now reports.
In the early hours of this morning, strong winds blew over this lorry as it was trying to travel north on the Forth Road Bridge. It happened at around 2 a.m, the lorry falling over onto the southbound carriageway. The bridge was closed to HGVs at the time, and the driver has been charged with dangerous driving. Hours later, and the road which links Edinburgh to Fife would usually have been packed with rush hour traffic. Instead, it was silent. The recovery process delayed because of the windy conditions.
He made some extensive damage to the central reserve grillage over a length of about 40 metres, which is the most extensive damage we've ever had at that member on the bridge. Conditions were very blustery at that time. The bridge was closed to all high-sided vehicles from midnight, and at the time of passage the gust speeds we recorded were round about 74 miles an hour.
Elsewhere in Newcastle city centre, Newgate Street was closed when part of the roof of this Debenhams store was torn off and debris strewn across the normally busy city centre street. In Pelton in County Durham, a house and these cars were also badly damaged. And in Gateshead, conditions were so bad the wind managed to blow this horse shed into the road from a nearby field. Northern Power Grid, which supplies homes in the northeastern Yorkshire, said the wind caused more than 25,500 customers to lose power. Meanwhile, SSE engineers are currently working to restore power to 1,500 properties in the north of Scotland.
Today we've had severe gales across the northern half of the UK and some weather impacts as well, but the air is just getting colder and colder. It's coming from a long way north, and that is feeding in more and more wintry showers across northern parts of the UK. But tomorrow we've got a spell of rain across southern parts of England and Wales. With the cold air coming in behind it, that could turn the rain to sleet and snow in the southeast in time for the evening rush hour tomorrow.
After several hours, crews on the Forth Road Bridge have now managed to remove the lorry from the central reservation, but it can't be taken off completely until the weather improves. Sian Gwezczek, BBC News.
And of course that weather forecast, those winds forecast to pick up again as the afternoon progresses. It's causing problems on some ferry routes in Scotland, possible snow showers on some of the higher roads as well. And as to the Forth Road Bridge, well, they have to wait for the winds to dip below 40 miles an hour for 20 minutes before they can start removing the lorry. Even when the lorry has gone, there'll obviously be checks on the infrastructure, so there's possible delays and disruptions here for the next few days. Sophie.
Lorna, thank you. The time is 1:20. Our top story this lunchtime. Donald Trump is embroiled in more controversy amid claims that Russia has damaging information about him. He has called it a political witch hunt. And still to come, after meeting at a factory making Lancaster bombers in World War II, the couple who are celebrating their 73rd wedding anniversary.
In South today, a warning the mild weather is about to end, plus concern over the handling of an investigation into security at Berkshire's nuclear weapons site, and an insight into work to help families coping with a child who doesn't sleep.
There was an emotional goodbye from President Obama last night as he delivered his farewell speech to the American people in his home city of Chicago. He listed his achievements after 8 years in the White House as thousands of his supporters chanted 4 more years. And he struck a somber note as he warned of threats to US democracy from inequality and racism and derided many of the policies advocated by his successor, Donald Trump. From Chicago, Laura Trevelyan sent this report.
Barack Obama returned to Chicago, the place where his political career began, to deliver his long-planned farewell address. The crowd, though, had other ideas. Smiling that one away, the president used his platform to underline what he sees as his achievements.
If I had told you 8 years ago that America would reverse a Great Recession, reboot our auto industry, and unleash the longest stretch of job creation in our history. If I had told you that we would win marriage equality and secure the right to health insurance for another 20 million of our fellow citizens. If I had told you all that, you might have said, our sights were set a little too high.
Turning to his theme of what could undermine America's democracy, the nation's first black president was direct about the state of race relations.
After my election, there was talk of a post-racial America. And such a vision, however well-intended, was never realistic. Race remains a potent and often divisive force in our society.
And after a divisive election campaign, Barack Obama had this rebuke.
America, we weaken those ties when we allow our political dialogue to become so corrosive that people of good character aren't even willing to enter into public service. So coarse with rancor that Americans with whom we disagree are seen not just as misguided, but as malevolent.
For Americans depressed by the state of their politics, the message from the man who started out as a community organizer was a simple one.
If you're tired of arguing with strangers on the internet, try talking with one of them in real life. If something needs fixing, then lace up your shoes and do some organizing. If you're disappointed by your elected officials, grab a clipboard, get some signatures, and run for office yourself.
Paying tribute to his wife Michelle and his daughters, the president became emotional.
Michelle LaVaughn Robinson, girl of the South Side. For the past 25 years, you have not only been my wife and mother of my children, you have been my best friend.
For those who had lined up for hours to hear him speak in person, the effort was worthwhile.
I thought it was very uplifting, and it gave us a message of hope and encouragement, and it was what we needed to hear right now.
We had a tough election, and we just need to keep fighting for the causes that we believe in.
Barack Obama's supporters were heartened by his uplifting message tonight, and he leaves office with his personal popularity at a high. But that didn't stop the American voters from choosing Donald Trump to replace him. And now Barack Obama must watch as Republicans try to dismantle much of his legacy. Laura Trevelyan, BBC News, Chicago.
A white supremacist has been sentenced to death for killing 9 black people at a church in the US state of South Carolina in 2015. Dylan Roof opened fire 75 times during a Bible study class in what prosecutors said was a racially motivated attack. He rejected a final chance to plead for his life at the court in Charleston, telling the jury he still felt like he'd had to do it. Sophie Long reports.
This is the man condemned to death for the cold-blooded murder of 9 people as they sat quietly praying. Dylan Roof was convicted last month of 33 federal charges, including murder and hate crimes. He told the sentencing hearing that he felt he had to carry out the killings. The brother of one of his victims said the sentence would not bring back his beloved sister.
This is a very hollow victory, because my sister's still gone. I wish that this verdict could have brought her back, but it can't.
The prosecutor said on June the 17th, 2015, members of one of Charleston's most historic black churches had opened the door for a white stranger with a smile. He had come with a hateful heart and a Glock 45. He'd sat in their Bible study group for 40 minutes before opening fire as they closed their eyes to pray, turning the peaceful church into a bloody crime scene. One of those who died was the local pastor and state senator Clementa Pinckney, a personal friend of the outgoing president, who sang at his memorial.
Sing grace, how sweet the sound.
Roof is the first person to face execution for a federal hate crime conviction.
It's a hard thing to know that someone's going to lose their life. But when you look at the totality of what happened, it's hard to say that this person deserves to live when the 9 others don't.
Roof will be formally sentenced later today. Sophie Long, BBC News.
A couple who met at a factory making Lancaster bombers in World War II are celebrating their 73rd wedding anniversary. 97-year-old Trudy met 96-year-old Barclay Patois when he joined the factory on Merseyside. Despite opposition to the relationship, the mixed-race couple did marry and now have 7 great-grandchildren. Our correspondent Stuart Flinders reports.
This is a story of war and peace, of Trudy and Barclay. It begins in the days of empire. Barclay was an apprentice engineer in British Guyana. In 1942, he found himself in Liverpool.
It was freezing cold, and the snow was an eye-opener.
Barclay was put to work making Lancaster bombers at a factory in Speke.
Many thousands of men and women toil night and day to produce the gigantic warplanes for Bomber Command.
His assistant on the production line was Trudy.
And everybody used to laugh at us. They said, he's ruining you, isn't he? He used to bring me sandwiches in and makes me cups of tea.
Barclay and Trudy took a shine to each other, and a visit to the Empire Theatre to see star singer Richard Tauber clinched it.
We went to see Richard Tauber, and it was...
Richard Tauber
My Heart and I.
My Heart and I?
Yeah, and that's my life out for him.
That's your song, is it?
Yes.
But in the Liverpool of the 1940s, Trudy and Barclay faced opposition to their marriage.
Oh, I never got any peace. The people and you know, and it didn't bother me.
And that's because you were white and,
Yes,
and Barclay's black.
Did not bother me one bit.
What advice would you give a young couple just starting out now together?
If he has a night out, she's got to have one. He has to look after the children.
What do you think, Barclay? What advice would you give a young couple?
Mind, he was out every night at the club.
Stuart Flinders with that report. And finally, have a look at this footage. They are pictures from a camera attached to the neck of a female polar bear, and they show the two bears breaking through ice sheets in order to hunt for prey. The US Geological Survey hopes that it will help researchers better understand how the animals are responding to declining sea ice levels. Time now for a look at the weather. Thomas Schaffenacke is here, and chilly.
Yeah, chilly, that's one word of what word are you using? You know, I'm sticking my neck out a little bit, just how you may have been seeing some of the other forecasts, watching forecasts with the snow. There is some on the way. It's going to be very tricky forecasting it. We've already had snow showers across northern areas, but the south could be in for some. But this low pressure, that's what has been the story across the north today. Blowing gales. I mean, it's been nasty across the northeast of England into Scotland as well. Those winds are starting to ease a little bit now. Still really blustering. You can see the wintry showers across the north now. For the time being, so rest of this afternoon into this evening, across the south, it's fairly quiet. Icy patches across northern areas where those snow showers continue. This is cold air coming in all the way from the Arctic. But we're watching areas to the southwest. So what's happening is, let me explain how this is really quite complicated. You've got mild air on the one hand coming in from the south. You've got colder air from the north. You get that clash, and then you get this sort of boundary, this really narrow boundary of where rain and snow starts to mix. So let's zoom in a little bit, because where this boundary is, we also have a weather front coming in, so I've deliberately got out of the way. Initially, it starts off as rain with milder air to the south coming off the Atlantic, and as that rain moves towards the east and north, it starts to mix in with that colder air that's coming from the north, from southern Wales, maybe the southwest, through the Midlands and into the southeast. Now, how much? It's difficult, this one. If it snows over the hills, South Downs, say, we could be talking about 5 centimetres, that's 2 inches, maybe even more than that. Might even settle in the parks in London. In the north, it's a different situation. Here we've got straightforward northwesterly winds here, bringing those wintry showers. So you can see two areas of snow, the wintry showers in the north, and this awkward mix of rain, sleet and snow across the south, which is a forecaster's nightmare. So for some of us, we'll be thinking, where was the snow? Others may get a fair bit. So it's a real mix of weather on the way. But the point is, Thursday night into Friday, in the south and in the north, could be nasty, could be some icy stretches. And then additionally on Friday, we've got yet another weather system coming in from the north, sliding along the east. And these little white worms, those big waves, a potential storm surge there, which means waves maybe overtopping some of the sea defences there. And on top of that, we've got some wintry weather too. So a real mix of weather on the way in the coming days.
Beautifully explained, though, if I may say so. Thank you, Thomas. A reminder now of our main story this lunchtime. Donald Trump is embroiled in more controversy amid claims that Russia has damaging information about him. That is all from the BBC News at 1, so it's goodbye from me on BBC One. We now join the BBC's news teams where you are. Bye-bye.